The silver locket felt cold and final in Clara Ashworth's palm as she stood before the general store counter in El Paso, Texas, knowing this was the last thing of value she owned in the world. The year was 1878, and the autumn sun beat mercilessly through the dusty window of Miller's general store, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floorboards. Clara's stomach had been empty for 2 days now, and the gnawing hunger made her hands shake as she held out the locket to Mr. Miller, who peered at it through wire-rimmed spectacles with all the warmth of a rattlesnake eyeing a mouse. "This was my mother's," Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her fingers. "Sterling silver, real garnet stone in the center. Should be worth at least enough for flour, beans, and maybe some salt pork." Mr. Miller picked up the locket with thick fingers, turning it over with exaggerated slowness. His thin lips pursed as he examined it, and Clara knew what was coming before he even spoke. She had seen that expression on too many faces in the 3 months since her father had died, leaving her alone with nothing but a failing homestead 10 miles outside town and debts she could never hope to repay. "Might give you a pound of flour and some cornmeal for it," Miller said, setting the locket down with a dismissive clink. "Silver's not worth what it used to be, and this piece has seen better days." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That locket is worth 10 times what you're offering, and you know it." "Then take it somewhere else," Miller said with a shrug, already turning away to straighten cans on the shelf behind him, but there was nowhere else. The next town was 30 miles away, and Clara had no horse, no wagon, nothing but her own 2 feet and the worn boots on them that were starting to split at the seams. She had already sold her father's pocket watch, her grandmother's quilts, every tool and implement from the homestead that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. The locket was truly the last thing of any value, and Miller knew it. "Fine," Clara whispered, hating the defeat in her own voice. "I'll take what you're offering." Miller turned back with a satisfied expression, reaching for the locket, when the door to the general store swung open with enough force to make the bell above it ring out sharply. Clara turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, and as her eyes adjusted, she made out the shape of a cowboy removing his hat as he stepped inside. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and honest labor. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges, and his face was tanned from years in the sun. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention, a striking blue-green that seemed to take in everything at once. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from living an outdoor life. "Afternoon, Mr. Miller," the cowboy said, his voice a deep baritone with a slight Texas drawl. "I'm here to pick up that order I sent word about last week." "Mr. Kincaid," Miller said, and his tone changed entirely, becoming obsequious and eager. "Yes, sir. I have everything ready for you in the back. Let me just finish up with this customer and I'll bring it right out." The cowboy, Mr. Kincaid, nodded, and then his gaze fell on Clara. For a moment, their eyes met, and Clara felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time, something that had nothing to do with hunger or desperation. There was kindness in his eyes and curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. She looked away quickly, turning back to Mr. Miller and holding out the locket once more. "Just give me what you promised." But the cowboy stepped closer, his boots making solid sounds on the wooden floor. "Pardon me for intruding, miss, but I couldn't help but overhear." "May I see that locket?" Clara hesitated, unsure if this stranger's interest would help or hinder her situation. But something in his open, honest face made her extend her hand toward him. He took the locket gently, holding it up to the light streaming through the window, examining it with careful attention. "This is beautiful work," he said quietly. "Real craftsmanship. Sterling silver with genuine garnet, if I'm not mistaken." He looked at Mr. Miller with an expression that had cooled considerably. "And you were offering a pound of flour and some cornmeal for it." Miller shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Times are hard, Mr. Kincaid. I have to think of my profit margins." "Times are hard for everyone," the cowboy said, his voice even but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Which is why it's even more important to deal fairly." He turned to Clara, and his expression softened. "Miss, this locket is worth at least $20, probably more to the right buyer." "Don't let anyone tell you different." Clara's throat tightened. $20 would buy enough food to last her months, maybe even through the winter if she was careful. "I know what it's worth," she said quietly, "but I need food and I need it today." The cowboy studied her face for a long moment, and Clara wondered what he saw there. The hollowness in her cheeks from too many missed meals. The dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights worrying about how she would survive. The threadbare dress that had once been deep blue but was now faded to a pale gray, mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. "I'll give you $40 for it," he said suddenly. Clara's eyes widened. "40? But you just said it was worth 20. 20 to most folks," the cowboy said with a slight smile. "But I have a particular appreciation for fine things, and this locket clearly means something special." "Family heirloom, I'm guessing," Clara nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. The cowboy, Owen Kincaid as she now knew him to be called, reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He counted out $40 in bills and coins, then pressed them into Clara's palm, folding her fingers around the money. His hands were calloused but warm, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt through her. "Wait," Clara said, finding her voice. "The locket. You paid for it." She tried to hand him the piece of jewelry, but he gently pushed her hand back. "You keep it," he said. "Consider the money a loan if you must. You can pay me back when times are better." "I don't even know you," Clara whispered. "Why would you do this?" Owen Kincaid met her eyes steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I know what it's like to be hungry and alone." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in a polite gesture. "Owen Kincaid, miss. I run the Double K Ranch about 15 miles northeast of here." "Clara Ashworth," she replied, clutching the money and the locket to her chest. "I'm on the old Ashworth place, 10 miles west." Recognition flickered in Owen's eyes. "I heard about your father's passing. I'm sorry for your loss." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her father had died of pneumonia 3 months ago, and she still felt the loss like a physical ache in her chest. They had never been wealthy, but he had been a good man who worked hard and treated people fairly. His death had left her completely alone in the world. "Mr. Kincaid," Mr. Miller interrupted, his voice tight with poorly concealed irritation. "About your order." Owen turned to the shopkeeper and his expression cooled again. "Yes, my order, and while you're gathering it, I'd like to add a few things." He looked at Clara. "Miss Ashworth, do you have a wagon outside?" "No," Clara admitted. "I walked." 10 miles. Owen's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a journey, especially in this heat." Clara lifted her chin. "I've made it before." "I don't doubt it," Owen said, and there was respect in his voice. "But there's no need to make it again today. My wagon is right outside, and I'll be heading past your place on my way back to the ranch. I'd be happy to give you a ride home." Pride warred with practicality in Clara's chest. She had walked into town that morning before dawn, when the air was still cool, planning to walk back in the evening when the worst of the heat had passed. But the thought of riding in a wagon instead of trudging those 10 miles on foot was almost impossibly tempting. "I don't want to be a burden," she said carefully. "No burden at all," Owen assured her. "Now let's get you properly supplied. Mr. Miller, add 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of beans, 10 pounds of sugar, 5 pounds of coffee, salt, baking powder, a side of bacon, and," he glanced at Clara, "whatever else Miss Ashworth needs." "Mr. Kincaid, I can't let you," Clara started, but he held up a hand. "You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing this because I want to." His blue-green eyes held hers. "Please, let me help." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that couldn't be faked, that made Clara's protests die on her lips. She had been alone for so long, struggling to survive on her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer help without expecting something in return. It made her throat tight and her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. "Thank you," she whispered. For the next 20 minutes, Clara watched in a daze as Owen filled her order with provisions she hadn't dared to hope for. Flour, beans, sugar, coffee, salt, baking powder, bacon, dried apples, molasses, cornmeal, oats, and even a small tin of tea. He added candles, soap, matches, and a bolt of sturdy cotton fabric that would make a new dress or two. When Mr. Miller tallied up the cost, Clara felt faint. It came to over $60, more money than she had seen in months. Owen paid without blinking, counting out the bills with the ease of a man who had money and wasn't afraid to spend it. Mr. Miller loaded everything into crates, and Owen carried them out to his wagon with casual strength. Clara followed, still clutching the $40 and her mother's locket, feeling as though she had stepped into some kind of dream. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses that looked like they were well cared for. Owen loaded the crates efficiently, then turned to help Clara up onto the bench seat. His hand was steady and sure as she placed her fingers in his palm, and he lifted her up as though she weighed nothing at all. As Owen took his place beside her and clicked to the horses, Clara found herself acutely aware of his presence. He was close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of days spent squinting into the sun. There was something solid and reliable about him, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. They rode in silence for the first mile, leaving El Paso behind and heading out into the open country. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. Clara had always loved this land, even when it tried to kill you with heat or cold or drought. It was honest in its brutality, which was more than could be said for most people. "You've been managing the homestead on your own?" Owen asked, breaking the silence. Clara nodded. "Since Papa died." "It's not easy, but I'm managing. Any family that could help? Brothers, sisters, cousins?" "No one," Clara said. "My mother died when I was 12. I was the only child. Papa had a brother, but he died in the war. Mama's family were all back east, and I never met them." Owen was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard row to hoe, being alone." "What about you?" Clara asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "You have family?" "I do," Owen said, and there was warmth in his voice. "My parents are still alive, though they're getting on in years. My father started the Double K when he first came to Texas, back in '53. Built it up from nothing. I have 2 younger brothers, both working the ranch with me. Probably drive me crazy half the time, but I wouldn't trade them for anything." Clara felt a pang of envy for the family Owen described so casually. She tried to imagine what it would be like, having brothers, having parents still living, having a whole network of people to rely on. It seemed like a fairy tale. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "I know," Owen replied, and his voice was serious. "I don't take it for granted." He glanced at her. How have you been surviving? The Ashworth place doesn't have much workable land, as I recall. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But there was something about Owen that invited honesty, and she found herself telling him more than she had told anyone in months. Papa left debts, she said. The bank holds a note on the land. I've been selling off everything we owned, piece by piece, just to keep from starving. Today was the last thing I had of any real value. She touched the locket, still tucked safely in her pocket. I've been trying to grow vegetables, keep some chickens, but the well is starting to run dry, and without money for seed or feed, it's a losing battle. Owen's jaw tightened. How much do you owe the bank? $200, Clara said, and the number felt impossibly large. They've given me until the end of November to pay, or they'll foreclose. That's less than 2 months away. I know. Clara looked out at the passing landscape, blinking back tears. I've been trying to figure out what to do. I could try to find work in town, but there's nothing available for a woman on her own. The saloon keeper offered me a job, but she paused, unable to finish the sentence. Owen's expression darkened. But working in a saloon comes with expectations no decent woman should have to meet. Exactly. Clara was grateful he understood, without her having to spell it out. I thought about trying to make it to San Antonio, find factory work or something, but I don't have money for the journey, and I'd have to leave the homestead behind. It's all I have left of my parents. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking and the horses' hooves making steady rhythm on the packed dirt road. Clara found herself studying Owen's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his capable hands held the reins with easy confidence. He was thinking about something, she could tell from the slight furrow between his brows. What if there was another way? Owen said finally. Clara looked at him. What do you mean? The Double K is a big operation, Owen said carefully. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, have several hands working for us, plus my brothers and my father. It's a lot to manage, and my mother, bless her, is getting tired. She could use help with the house, the cooking, the garden, things like that. Would you consider working for us? Clara's heart leaped with hope, then immediately sank. Mr. Kincaid, I appreciate the offer, but if I leave the homestead unattended, someone will just move in and take it. Squatters' rights. I'd lose it for sure. Owen nodded as though he had expected this response. Then what if we came to a different arrangement? What if the Double K bought your father's debt from the bank and you worked it off? You could stay on your land, keep it in your name, and work for us a few days a week until the debt is cleared. We'd provide supplies, food, anything you need. Fair wages for fair work. It sounded too good to be true, and Clara had learned the hard way that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. His eyes were serious, searching her face. Miss Ashworth, Clara, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't make a habit of rescuing damsels in distress. But when I saw you in that store trying to trade your mother's locket for flour, something in me just— He paused, searching for words. I couldn't walk away. Maybe it's because I remember when my own family was struggling, when we first came to Texas and had nothing but hope and hard work. My mother went hungry plenty of times to make sure her children ate. I saw that same look in your eyes today, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. I'm not charity. I'm not offering charity, Owen said firmly. I'm offering fair work for fair pay. My mother genuinely does need help, and you clearly need steady work and supplies. It's a business arrangement that benefits us both. And the debt. We'd buy it from the bank at a discount. Likely get it for $150 or so, since they'd rather have cash in hand than wait and risk you defaulting. You'd work it off at standard wages, probably take you about 6 months to a year depending on how many days a week you can work. At the end of it, the debt is cleared. Your land is yours free and clear, and you'll have had steady food and supplies the whole time. It was a lifeline, pure and simple, and Clara would be a fool to refuse it. But there was a part of her that was terrified of owing anyone anything, of being dependent on someone else's generosity. She had fought so hard to stay independent after her father died, even as everything fell apart around her. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Owen nodded, accepting this, and clicked to the horses to start moving again. "That's fair. Think it over and let me know. But Clara, the offer stands either way. If you need supplies, if you need help, you can come to the Double K. You don't have to face this alone." They rode the rest of the way to Clara's homestead in companionable silence. When the small house came into view, Clara felt the familiar mix of love and despair she experienced every time she saw it. The house her father had built with his own hands, small but sturdy, with a covered porch and real glass windows. The barn that was starting to sag on one side. The empty corral where they had once kept horses. The small vegetable garden, withered and struggling in the drought. Owen helped her down from the wagon, then began unloading the supplies. Clara protested that she could carry them herself, but he ignored her, hauling the heavy sacks and crates into her small pantry as though they weighed nothing. When everything was unloaded, he stood in her kitchen, looking around with an assessing eye. "Roof looks solid," he commented. "That's good. You'll need it when the winter rains come." "Papa made sure this house would last," Clara said with quiet pride. "He built it to stand." Owen nodded approvingly. "Good man." He pulled a small card from his vest pocket and handed it to her. "This has directions to the Double K. If you need anything at all, you come find me." "Understood." Clara took the card, her fingers brushing his. That same jolt of electricity ran through her at the contact. "I understand. And Mr. Kincaid, Owen, thank you for everything." Owen settled his hat on his head and touched the brim in that polite gesture she was coming to recognize as his trademark. "No thanks needed, Clara. Just take care of yourself." He paused at the door. "I'll be back in a few days to check on you if that's all right." Clara found herself nodding before she could think about whether it was wise. That would be all right. After Owen left, Clara stood in her pantry, looking at the supplies that filled the shelves that had been bare that morning. Flour, beans, sugar, coffee, all the things she had been doing without for weeks. She made herself a pot of real coffee, not the chicory substitute she had been drinking, and sat on her porch as the sun set, sipping the rich, bitter brew and thinking about the strange twist her life had taken. Owen Kincaid had come into her life like a force of nature, unexpected and overwhelming. She didn't know what to make of him, this cowboy who had paid far too much for a locket he didn't want, who had filled her pantry without expecting anything in return, who had offered her a way out of the impossible situation she had been facing. Part of her was deeply suspicious, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal what he really wanted from her. But another part of her, the part that had seen the kindness in his eyes and felt the steadiness of his presence, wanted to believe that he was exactly what he seemed to be, a good man trying to help someone in need. She spent the evening cooking a real meal, the first in weeks. Beans flavored with bacon, cornbread made with real flour and sugar, and coffee to wash it down. Her stomach, shrunken from too many missed meals, couldn't hold much, but what she ate tasted like heaven. That night, lying in her small bed in the room that had been hers since childhood, Clara fingered her mother's locket and thought about Owen's offer. 6 months to a year of work to clear her debt, to own her land free and clear. It was more than fair. It was generous. And yet, accepting it meant accepting help, meant admitting she couldn't do it alone. But maybe, Clara thought as sleep began to claim her, maybe being strong didn't mean doing everything alone. Maybe being strong meant knowing when to accept a helping hand. 3 days later, Clara was in her garden trying to coax life from the struggling plants when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead, and saw Owen Kincaid driving toward her house. Her heart did an unexpected flutter in her chest. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, and Clara noticed he was carrying something wrapped in burlap. "Afternoon, Clara," he called out, his voice warm and friendly. "Brought you something." Clara walked over, curious despite herself. "You've already brought me more than enough." "Can't have too much of a good thing," Owen said with a slight smile. He unwrapped the burlap to reveal several clay pots containing healthy, thriving vegetable plants. "Tomatoes, peppers, squash. My mother's been growing them in the greenhouse. Thought they might do well in your garden." Clara stared at the plants, then at Owen. "Your mother's greenhouse, she loves her garden," Owen said, "grows twice what we can eat. She was happy to share when I told her about your situation." "You told your mother about me?" Owen had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I mentioned I had met a young woman who was managing a homestead on her own and could use some help. My mother has strong feelings about neighbors helping neighbors." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I'd like to meet her someday." "I'm sure you will," Owen said, and something in his tone made Clara look at him more closely. There was a light in his eyes, a warmth that went beyond simple neighborly kindness. It made her pulse quicken. Together, they planted the vegetables in Clara's garden, Owen doing most of the heavy digging while Clara arranged the plants and patted soil around their roots. They worked well together, Clara noticed, falling into an easy rhythm without needing to discuss it. Owen seemed to know instinctively when she needed help and when to let her do things herself. "Have you thought about my offer?" Owen asked as they finished planting the last tomato. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of dirt. "I have, and I'd like to accept if it's still open." Owen's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made Clara's breath catch. "It's definitely still open. I'm glad, Clara, truly." "When would you want me to start? How about we give you a few days to get settled, get your strength back? Then you could come to the ranch, say, 3 days a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll pick you up in the morning and bring you back in the evening." It was more than generous, and Clara felt tears threaten again. "That sounds perfect." Owen stood, brushing dirt from his hands, and looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Clara, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about paying off a debt. My family, we take care of our own, and as far as we're concerned, you're one of ours now. If you need anything, anything at all, you come to us." "All right," Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She had been alone for so long that the idea of being part of something larger, even peripherally, was almost overwhelming. Over the next week, Clara felt herself coming back to life. With a full pantry and the vegetables Owen had brought thriving in her garden, she began to regain the weight she had lost. The hollow look left her cheeks, and the dark circles under her eyes faded. She mended her dresses, cleaned her house from top to bottom, and prepared herself for her first day of work at the Double K Ranch. When Owen arrived on Monday morning to pick her up, Clara was wearing her best dress, a simple calico in deep green that had been her mother's, and that Clara had altered to fit herself. She had braided her long brown hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, and had spent far too much time worrying about whether she looked presentable. The look on Owen's face when he saw her was worth every minute of worry. His eyes widened slightly, and a slow smile spread across his features. "You look lovely," he said simply, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. The drive to the Double K took nearly an hour, and Clara spent the time looking around with interest. The ranch was much larger than she had imagined, with vast stretches of grazing land dotted with cattle, sturdy fences in good repair, and several well-maintained buildings. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch and real curtains in the windows. Owen helped her down from the wagon, and Clara felt nervous butterflies in her stomach. She was about to meet his family, these people who had been kind enough to offer her work. What if they didn't like her? What if they thought she was taking advantage of Owen's generosity? But her fears proved groundless. Owen's mother, Margaret Kincaid, was a warm woman in her late 50s with graying brown hair and the same blue-green eyes as her son. She greeted Clara with a genuine smile and a firm handshake. "So you're the Clara my Owen has been talking about," Margaret said, and Clara didn't miss the "my Owen" or the knowing look in the older woman's eyes. "I'm so glad you've come to help us. The house is getting to be too much for me to manage on my own, and it will be wonderful to have another woman around." Owen's father, Robert Kincaid, was a tall man who had clearly passed his build to his sons. His hair was more gray than brown, and his face was deeply lined from years of outdoor work, but his handshake was still strong and his eyes were sharp and assessing. He looked Clara over carefully, then nodded as though she had passed some kind of test. "Welcome to the Double K, Miss Ashworth. Owen tells me you're a hard worker. We appreciate that around here." Owen's brothers were less subtle in their curiosity. James, the middle brother at 24, was shorter than Owen but broader, with a ready grin and mischievous eyes. Thomas, the youngest at 22, was tall and lean, still growing into his frame with a quieter demeanor but a kind smile. "So you're the reason Owen's been whistling while he works," James said with a grin that earned him an elbow in the ribs from Owen. "Ignore him," Owen said to Clara. "He's an idiot." "But a lovable idiot," James protested, rubbing his side. Clara found herself laughing, the sound feeling strange and wonderful after so many months of having little to laugh about. The Kincaid family was warm and welcoming in a way that made her chest ache with longing. This was what she had lost when her father died, this sense of belonging to something larger than herself. Margaret put Clara to work immediately, showing her around the kitchen and explaining what needed to be done. There was bread to bake, meals to prepare for the ranch hands, vegetables from the garden to preserve, and 100 other tasks that kept Clara busy and feeling useful. Margaret worked alongside her, chatting easily about ranch life and asking Clara about her own experiences. "Owen mentioned you lost your father recently," Margaret said as they kneaded bread dough together. "I'm so sorry, dear. That must have been terribly hard." "It was," Clara admitted. "He was all I had." Margaret reached over and patted her flour-dusted hand. "You're not alone anymore. You have us now." The simple kindness of the statement made Clara's eyes burn with tears. She blinked them back and focused on her kneading. Throughout the day, Owen found reasons to come into the house. He needed water for the horses. He wanted to check if his mother needed anything from the barn. He remembered a question his father had asked him to relay. Each time, his eyes sought out Clara, and each time she felt that flutter in her chest intensify. When it was time for the noon meal, Clara helped serve food to the ranch hands who came in from the range. They were a rough lot, weathered and hard-working men who treated her with cautious respect. She noticed that Owen stayed close, his presence a silent warning that she was under his protection. After the hands had eaten and returned to work, the Kincaid family sat down to their own meal. Clara was invited to join them, and she found herself seated between Owen and Margaret, feeling welcomed and included in a way that made her throat tight. "This beef stew is excellent," Robert said to Margaret. "You've outdone yourself." "That's Clara's doing," Margaret said with a smile. "She's a wonderful cook." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. "My mother taught me. She always said a good meal could fix most problems." "A wise woman," Robert said approvingly. The conversation flowed easily, touching on ranch business, the weather, local news from El Paso. Clara mostly listened, soaking in the warmth of a family dinner, something she hadn't experienced since before her father's illness. But she was also aware of Owen beside her, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the way his eyes would meet hers when someone said something amusing. After dinner, while Margaret rested, Owen showed Clara around the ranch. They walked past the barn where horses whickered in their stalls, past the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, out to where cattle grazed in the distance. "It's beautiful," Clara said, looking out over the land. "Your father built something amazing here." "He did," Owen agreed. "And someday it will belong to me and my brothers. We'll keep building on what he started." He glanced at her. "What about you, Clara? What do you want for your future?" Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. "I want to keep my land," she said finally. "I want to make something of the homestead, prove that Papa's dream wasn't for nothing. Maybe expand the garden, get some chickens, perhaps a cow, build something small but mine." "That's a good dream," Owen said softly. They had stopped walking and were standing near a fence, looking out over the land. "You know, I've been thinking." "About what?" Owen turned to face her, and Clara's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "About you. About the fact that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day I met you in Miller's store." Clara's heart began to pound. "Owen." "I know it's fast," Owen said, his voice low and earnest. "I know we barely know each other. But Clara, there's something about you that calls to something in me. You're strong and brave and determined, and when I look at you, I see someone I want to know better. Much better." "I feel it too," Clara whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and freeing. "That day in the store when you looked at me, something just shifted." Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her cheek with his calloused palm. His touch was gentle, reverent, and Clara found herself leaning into it. "May I court you?" Owen asked. Properly, the right way, Clara felt joy bloom in her chest, bright and warm and wonderful. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, you may." Owen's smile was radiant, and for a moment Clara thought he might kiss her. But instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was old-fashioned and sweet, and it made Clara feel cherished in a way she never had before. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Clara felt as though she was floating. Everything had changed so quickly. 3 weeks ago, she had been alone and desperate, trading away her last possession for food. Now she had a job, a full pantry, new friends, and the attention of a man who made her heart race. Over the following weeks, Clara fell into a routine. 3 days a week, Owen would pick her up in the morning and drive her to the Double K, where she worked alongside Margaret. The other days, she tended her own homestead, working in her garden, caring for the chickens Margaret had given her, and slowly bringing the property back to life. But the real treasure of those weeks was the time she spent with Owen. He courted her properly, as he had promised, taking her for walks around the ranch, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings before driving her home, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers or a particularly pretty stone he had found on the range. They talked about everything. Owen told her about his childhood, about coming to Texas with his family when he was just a boy, about learning to rope and ride and work cattle. Clara shared stories of her own childhood, of her mother teaching her to cook and sew, of her father reading to her from the few books they owned. "I always wanted to learn to read better," Clara admitted one evening. "Papa taught me the basics, but we didn't have many books, and after Mama died, there was always too much work to do." The next week, Owen brought her a stack of books from his family's collection. "Margaret insisted," he said, though Clara suspected it had been his idea. "She said every woman should have books to read." Clara treasured those books, reading by candlelight in the evenings and discussing what she had read with Owen on their drives to and from the ranch. They talked about everything from Shakespeare to the Bible to dime novels, and Clara found that Owen had a sharp mind and a genuine love of learning that matched her own hunger for knowledge. As autumn deepened and the air began to cool, Clara found herself falling in love. It wasn't the sudden, overwhelming passion she had read about in stories. It was quieter than that, a steady growing awareness that Owen Kincaid was becoming essential to her happiness. She looked forward to the days she would see him with an eagerness that kept her awake at night. She found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering what he was doing, whether he was thinking of her too. The Kincaid family had become like her own family. Margaret taught her how to can vegetables and cure meat, skills that would serve Clara well on her own homestead. Robert treated her with gruff affection, occasionally asking her opinion on ranch matters as though her thoughts had value. James teased her mercilessly, treating her like the sister he had never had, while Thomas was quieter but equally kind, helping her repair the sagging barn at her homestead one Saturday without being asked. It was Margaret who confirmed what Clara had been too afraid to put into words. They were alone in the kitchen one afternoon, preparing dinner when the older woman said casually, "You love him, don't you?" Clara's hand stilled in the process of peeling potatoes. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone looking," Margaret said with a gentle smile. "And Clara, dear, he loves you too. I've never seen my son look at anyone the way he looks at you." "We've only known each other for 2 months," Clara said, but her heart was singing. "Time doesn't matter when it's right," Margaret said firmly. "Robert and I knew each other for 6 weeks before he proposed. We've been married 33 years, and I've never regretted a single day." She squeezed Clara's shoulder. "When you know, you know." That evening, as Owen drove Clara home, he was quieter than usual. Clara wondered if something was wrong, but when she asked, he just shook his head and said he was thinking. When they arrived at Clara's homestead, Owen helped her down from the wagon but didn't immediately let go of her hand. "Clara, would you take a walk with me? There's something I want to show you." Curious, Clara agreed, and Owen led her around to the back of her house, where the last rays of sunset were painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The view stretched out over her land, the garden that was now thriving thanks to Owen's plants and Clara's hard work, the barn that had been repaired, the house that was once again maintained and cared for. "Look at what you've done," Owen said softly. "In just 2 months, you've brought this place back to life." "With your help," Clara pointed out. "With a little help, maybe," Owen conceded. "But it was your determination, your hard work, your refusal to give up that made the difference." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Clara, you're the strongest person I know. When I met you, you were at your lowest point, but you never stopped fighting. You could have given up, could have accepted defeat, but you didn't." "Where are you going with this, Owen?" Clara asked, her heart beginning to race. Owen took a deep breath, and Clara saw that his hands were actually trembling slightly. It made her love him even more, this strong, capable man who was nervous about what he was about to say. "I told you I would court you properly," Owen said, "and I meant it. But Clara, these past 2 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, spending time with you, watching you come back to life like this land, it's made me realize something. I don't want to just court you. I want to marry you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Owen released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, Clara saw a ring, simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the fading light. "This was my grandmother's ring," Owen said. "She left it to me before she passed, told me to give it to the woman who captured my heart." He met Clara's eyes. "You've captured more than my heart, Clara Ashworth. You've captured my imagination, my respect, my admiration, and my complete and total love. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. I want to fill your pantry not just with food, but with the abundance that comes from a life built together. Clara, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling, smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, Owen, yes, I'll marry you." Owen's whoop of joy startled birds from the nearby trees. He swept Clara up in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Clara breathed. The kiss was everything Clara had dreamed and more. Owen's lips were soft but firm, gentle but insistent, and Clara felt as though every nerve in her body was suddenly alive. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and felt Owen's arms come around her waist, holding her tight against him. The kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate, and Clara felt heat flood through her that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Clara Ashworth. I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "I never thought I could feel this way. I never thought anyone would see me, really see me the way you do." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Clara held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the last light of day, and felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "When?" she asked. "When can we be married?" "As soon as possible," Owen said fervently. "Tomorrow if I could arrange it. But," he took a breath, clearly trying to be sensible, "we should do it properly. Give you time to prepare, let my family help plan something nice. What do you say to a month from now? That will be right before the holidays, and we could spend our first Christmas as husband and wife." "A month," Clara said, testing the words. It felt both impossibly far away and frighteningly close. "Yes, a month is perfect." They stood on Clara's land, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set and the stars began to appear. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperation and loneliness to love and hope. She thought about that day in the general store when she had been ready to trade away her last possession, and how Owen had walked in and changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked softly. "About how lucky I am," Clara said. "How close I came to losing everything and how you saved me." Owen shook his head. "No, love, you saved yourself. I just gave you a hand up. But Clara, you're the one who held on, who kept fighting, who refused to break. That was all you." "We saved each other," Clara said, reaching up to touch his face. "Because, Owen, I may have been starving for food, but I was also starving for this. For connection, for love, for someone to see me as more than just a burden or a charity case. You gave me that. You gave me everything." The next month passed in a blur of preparation and excitement. Margaret threw herself into planning the wedding with the enthusiasm of a woman who had been waiting for her oldest son to marry. She insisted on making Clara a proper wedding dress, using the finest fabric that could be ordered from San Antonio. Clara divided her time between her homestead and the Double K, but now it was different. Now she was planning a future there, thinking about what it would be like to live at the ranch as Owen's wife. Owen had plans to build them their own house on the property, a place that would be theirs alone while still being part of the larger ranch operation. The Kincaids formally bought Clara's debt from the bank, and when the paperwork was finalized, Owen handed her the deed to her land with a smile. "Wedding present," he said. "Your land free and clear in your name. Even after we're married, it stays yours." Clara had cried, overwhelmed by the gesture. The land represented her parents' dream, her history, her independence. The fact that Owen understood how important it was to her, that he didn't expect her to give it up when they married, made her love him even more. As the wedding day approached, Clara found herself getting nervous. Not about marrying Owen, she had never been more certain of anything in her life, but about all the changes that were coming. She confided her fears to Margaret one afternoon while they were working on the final touches of the wedding dress. "It's natural to be nervous," Margaret assured her. "Marriage is a big step, but Clara, let me tell you something. A good marriage, a true partnership, it makes everything else in life better. The joys are sweeter because you have someone to share them with. The sorrows are easier because you don't face them alone. And the everyday moments, the simple act of living, becomes something special because you're doing it with the person you love." "What if I'm not good enough?" Clara whispered. "What if I don't know how to be a rancher's wife?" Margaret put down her needle and took Clara's hands. "You're already good enough, dear. More than good enough. Owen doesn't need you to be anything other than who you are. That's who he fell in love with," she smiled. "And as for being a rancher's wife, you'll learn. We all did. There's no manual, no set of rules. You just do your best, support your husband, build your life together, and trust that love will see you through." The wedding was held on a crisp November afternoon at the small church in El Paso. Clara wore the dress Margaret had made, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin that made her feel like a princess. Margaret had also lent her a veil that had been worn by 3 generations of Kincaid women, a delicate thing of lace and seed pearls that made Clara feel connected to a history larger than herself. Owen wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, and when Clara walked down the aisle on Robert Kincaid's arm, the look on Owen's face made her knees weak. He looked at her as though she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real and was about to become his wife. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Owen's voice was strong and clear. "I, Owen Robert Kincaid, take you, Clara Jane Ashworth, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in hardship, for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner, your protector, and your friend. I promise to build a life with you that honors the love we share." Clara's voice trembled with emotion as she repeated her vows. "I, Clara Jane Ashworth, take you, Owen Robert Kincaid, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in hardship, for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner, your helper, and your friend. I promise to build a life with you that honors the love we share." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. The small church erupted in applause, and Clara felt joy flood through her so intensely she thought she might float away. The reception was held at the Double K, with tables set up outside despite the cool weather. It seemed like half of El Paso had turned out, along with all the ranch hands and neighboring ranchers. There was food and music and dancing, and Clara found herself passed from partner to partner as everyone wanted to dance with the bride. But it was the dance with Owen that made her heart soar. He held her close as they swayed to the music, and Clara rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "Happy, Mrs. Kincaid," Owen murmured into her ear. "Deliriously," Clara replied. "I never knew I could feel this happy." "Get used to it," Owen said, "because I plan to make you this happy every single day for the rest of our lives." As the sun set and the stars came out, Owen and Clara slipped away from the party. Owen had prepared a room for them in the ranch house, a space that would be theirs until their own house was built. It was furnished simply but comfortably, with a large bed covered in one of Margaret's beautiful quilts, a dresser, a washstand, and a small fireplace where a fire crackled cheerfully. Clara stood in the center of the room, suddenly nervous now that they were alone. She had some idea of what happened between a husband and wife, but her mother had died before she could explain the details, and Clara found herself uncertain. Owen seemed to sense her nervousness. He came to her slowly, taking her hands in his. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world." "I want to," Clara whispered. I don't know what to do." Owen's smile was gentle. "We'll figure it out together." He cupped her face in his hands, kissing her slowly, deeply, until Clara forgot to be nervous. His hands were patient and gentle as he helped her out of her wedding dress, as he laid her on the bed and showed her with touch and whisper what it meant to be loved completely. That night, as Clara lay in Owen's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt a peace she had never known. This was home, she realized. Not a place, but a person. Owen was her home and she was his. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Clara's life. She moved into the ranch house, sharing the room with Owen while construction began on their own home. During the day, she worked alongside Margaret, managing the household and learning the intricacies of running a large ranch operation. In the evenings, she and Owen would take long walks, talking about their day, planning their future, simply enjoying being together. Winter came, and with it the cold winds and occasional snow that swept down from the north. Clara experienced her first Christmas as a married woman, surrounded by the warmth and chaos of the Kincaid family. There were gifts and laughter and too much food, and Clara felt her heart swell with gratitude for these people who had welcomed her so completely into their fold. In the spring, their house was completed. It was a beautiful structure, larger than Clara's original homestead, but not so large as to be ostentatious. It had a spacious kitchen, a comfortable parlor, 3 bedrooms for the children they hoped to have, and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Owen carried Clara over the threshold on the day they moved in, both of them laughing like children. They spent that first night in their new home making love in their new bed, and Clara felt as though her life was finally, truly beginning. By the time summer arrived, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror, and she found herself seeking out Margaret for advice and reassurance. "You'll be a wonderful mother," Margaret said firmly when Clara confessed her fears. "You have so much love to give, and that's what matters most." Owen was overjoyed at the news. He became even more protective of Clara, trying to convince her to rest more, to let others do the heavy work. Clara tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and concern. As her belly grew round with their child, Clara found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her here. Less than a year ago, she had been alone and desperate, trading her mother's locket for food. Now she was surrounded by love, carrying a child, building a life with a man who cherished her. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Clara mentioned this to Owen. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed," she said, resting her hand on her swollen belly. "If you hadn't walked into that general store that day, I don't know where I'd be now." Owen covered her hand with his own. "I thank God every day that I did, but Clara, you would have survived. You're a survivor. That's one of the things I love most about you." "Maybe," Clara said, "but surviving isn't the same as living. You taught me the difference." Their son was born in February of 1879, arriving during a cold snap that had the whole ranch bundled up by fires. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara wondered if she would survive it. But Margaret was there, steady and calm, guiding her through. And when Clara finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. They named him Robert Owen Kincaid, after his grandfather and father, but called him Bobby. He had Owen's dark hair and Clara's brown eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had the entire Kincaid family wrapped around his tiny finger. Owen was a devoted father from the start. Clara would often wake in the night to find him standing by Bobby's cradle, just watching their son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. He changed diapers, walked the floor with a crying baby, and sang off key lullabies that somehow always worked to soothe Bobby to sleep. As Bobby grew from an infant to a toddler, Clara found herself pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after Owen's mother, was born in the spring of 1880. She had her father's blue-green eyes and her mother's delicate features, and she completed their family in a way Clara hadn't realized was missing. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The Double K continued to thrive under the combined efforts of the Kincaid family. Clara's original homestead was incorporated into the ranch, though they kept the house maintained and used it for storage, and as a place for ranch hands to stay when they were working that section of the property. Clara became known throughout the region as a skilled manager and a generous neighbor. She remembered what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure that anyone who came to the Double K in need was never turned away empty-handed. She and Owen established a reputation for fair dealing and honest work that brought respect to the family name. Robert and Margaret Kincaid grew older, gradually stepping back from the daily operation of the ranch and leaving it in the capable hands of their sons. James eventually married a schoolteacher from El Paso, a smart, practical woman named Helen who fit perfectly into the family. Thomas married a few years later, choosing a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread. The family grew larger, with more grandchildren arriving to fill the house with noise and laughter. Through it all, Owen and Clara's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and miscommunication. But they had learned to talk through problems, to listen to each other, to compromise when needed and stand firm when necessary. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and it showed in everything they did. One evening, when Bobby was 8 and little Maggie was 6, and Clara was pregnant with their third child, she found herself back at the general store in El Paso. Mr. Miller had long since sold the store to a younger couple, and the new owners were much fairer in their dealings. Clara was picking up supplies, her children running around her feet, when she paused and looked at the spot where she had once stood, desperate and alone, trying to trade her mother's locket for food. It felt like a lifetime ago. In a way, it was. That Clara, desperate and alone, no longer existed. She had been transformed by love, by family, by the simple act of letting someone help her when she needed it most. "Mama, can we get peppermint sticks?" Maggie asked, tugging on Clara's skirt. Clara smiled down at her daughter. "Of course, sweetheart." As she paid for the supplies and the peppermint sticks, using money from the ranch account that had her name on it as well as Owen's, Clara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more than she had ever dared to dream. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara and Owen sat on their porch, a habit they had maintained since the early days of their marriage. Clara was knitting a blanket for the baby that would arrive in a few months, while Owen whittled a toy horse for Bobby. "I was thinking today about the day we met," Clara said, her needles clicking rhythmically. Owen looked up with a smile. "Were you?" "I was in the general store, and I remembered standing there with Mama's locket, thinking my life was over." Clara paused in her knitting. "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day. Clara, you've thanked me 100 times. I know, but I don't think you understand what it meant. You didn't just give me food and money, you gave me hope. You showed me that I wasn't alone, that there were still good people in the world, that life could be better than just surviving day to day." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. "You gave me everything, Owen. Everything that matters." Owen set down his whittling and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You gave me everything too, love. Before I met you, I had a good life, a family I loved, work I was proud of. But there was something missing, and I didn't even know it until I saw you standing in that store, brave and proud even when you had every reason to give up. You showed me what real strength looks like. You showed me what love should be. And every single day since, you've made my life better just by being in it." Clara leaned down to kiss him, a long, sweet kiss that held 13 years of love and commitment. When they broke apart, Owen rested his hand on her swollen belly, feeling their child kick beneath his palm. "3 children," he said with wonder. "Who would have thought that scared young man who walked into a general store and saw a beautiful woman trying to trade a locket would end up here?" "Not scared," Clara corrected with a smile. "You were never scared." "I was terrified," Owen admitted. "Terrified that you'd say no when I offered to help. Terrified that I was being too forward when I asked to court you. Absolutely petrified when I proposed." He grinned. "But you were worth every moment of fear." Their 3rd child, another son they named Daniel James, was born in the early summer of 1881. He was a large baby, healthy and loud, with a head full of red hair that came from some recessive Kincaid gene and made everyone laugh with delight. As Clara recovered from the birth, surrounded by her family, holding her newborn son while her older children played nearby and her husband sat beside her with his hand in hers, she thought about how far she had come. From desperation to abundance. From loneliness to being surrounded by love. From having nothing to having everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "About how full my pantry is," Clara said with a soft laugh. "Literally and figuratively." Owen smiled, understanding immediately. "It will always be full, love. I promised you that the day I proposed, and I meant it. Whatever you need, whatever our children need, I'll provide it." "I know," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "And that's what makes me the luckiest woman in Texas." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Robert Kincaid passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 72, surrounded by his family. Margaret followed him 5 years later, and though their passing left a hole in the family, the legacy they had built lived on in their children and grandchildren. Owen took over as the head of the Double K, with his brothers working alongside him as equal partners. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in West Texas. But more important than financial success was the reputation the family built for fairness, integrity, and compassion. Clara became involved in the growing community, helping to establish a school in El Paso and working to ensure that families in need had access to food and supplies. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate, and she used her position to help others whenever she could. Bobby grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He learned everything Owen could teach him about managing cattle, maintaining the land, and treating people fairly. Maggie inherited her mother's intelligence and her grandmother's business sense, keeping the ranch's books with meticulous precision. Daniel, with his red hair and mischievous grin, had a way with horses that made him invaluable to the operation. As Clara entered her 40s, she sometimes found herself pausing to take stock of her life. She and Owen had been married for over 20 years, and every year had been better than the last. They had built something beautiful together, not just in the ranch and the family, but in the life they shared. One autumn evening, Clara was going through old trunks in the attic of their home, looking for blankets to air out before winter. In the bottom of one trunk, she found her mother's locket, the piece of jewelry that had nearly been the last thing she owned. She lifted it out carefully, the silver catching the lamplight, and opened it to see the faded photographs inside. Her mother on one side, her father on the other, both long gone but never forgotten. "I found something," she called down to Owen, who was working in his office below. He came up the stairs, and Clara showed him the locket. Owen took it gently, examining it with the same care he had shown that day in the general store so many years ago. "I remember this," he said softly. "This is what brought us together." "In a way," Clara agreed, "though I like to think we would have found each other eventually." Owen handed the locket back to her. "What are you going to do with it?" Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'm going to give it to Maggie when she's older. She should have something of her grandmother's, something with history and meaning." She paused. "And I'm going to tell her the story of how her father saw her mother trying to sell it for food, and instead of taking advantage, he filled her pantry and changed her life." "Our lives," Owen corrected, pulling Clara into his arms. "You changed my life just as much as I changed yours." They stood together in the attic, holding each other as the sun set outside the window, casting golden light across the dusty floor. Clara thought about that desperate young woman she had been, thought about the kind cowboy who had seen past her desperation to the person beneath. She thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments of joy and sorrow, all the everyday miracles of a life built together. "I love you," she whispered into Owen's chest. "I love you too," Owen replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." As they made their way back downstairs, Clara could hear the sounds of their family. Bobby was in the barn, settling the horses for the night. Maggie was in the kitchen, helping with dinner. Daniel's laughter rang out from somewhere outside. The house was full of life, full of love, full of all the things that mattered. The years continued their march, bringing more grandchildren as Bobby and Maggie and Daniel grew up and married and started families of their own. The Double K expanded, incorporating more land, more cattle, becoming a true legacy that would last for generations. Owen's hair turned silver and lines deepened around his eyes, but Clara thought he had never been more handsome. Her own hair grayed at the temples, and she moved a bit slower than she once had, but she had never felt more content. They grew old together, just as they had promised all those years ago at the altar. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch. There was music and dancing and food, and Clara found herself passed from one set of loving arms to another, as everyone wanted to dance with her. But it was the dance with Owen that mattered most. They swayed together under the stars, just as they had at their wedding reception, and Clara rested her head on her husband's shoulder with a contented sigh. 30 years, Owen murmured. Best 30 years of my life. Mine too, Clara agreed. She pulled back slightly to look up at his face. Do you ever regret it, walking into that general store deciding to help a desperate stranger? Owen's laugh was warm and genuine. Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle and reverent as it had been all those years ago. You were never just a desperate stranger, Clara. From the moment I saw you, you were the woman I was going to spend my life with. I just knew. I knew too, Clara admitted. I fought it at first, didn't want to believe it could be real. But deep down, I knew. As they continued to dance, surrounded by their family, Clara thought about the thread of fate that had woven their lives together. If she hadn't been at the store that exact day. If Owen hadn't chosen that moment to pick up his supplies. If he had been a different kind of man, one who looked the other way when he saw someone in need. If she had been too proud to accept his help. But none of those things had happened. Instead, they had found each other at exactly the right moment, and they had built a life that was more beautiful than anything Clara could have imagined on that desperate day when she had tried to trade her mother's locket for food. Owen Kincaid had filled her pantry that day, had given her food and hope and a reason to keep fighting. But more than that, he had filled her life with love, with purpose, with joy. He had given her a family, a home, a future. He had given her everything, and she had given him the same in return. As the stars wheeled overhead and the music played on, Clara Kincaid, formerly Clara Ashworth, held tight to her husband and knew that her story had turned out exactly as it was meant to. From desperation to abundance, from loneliness to love, from barely surviving to truly living. It was a good story, she thought. No, it was better than good. It was the best story she could have imagined because it was true, because it was hers, because she had lived it with the man she loved. And the best part, the story wasn't over yet. There were still more years to come, more memories to make, more love to share. The pantry of her life was full to overflowing, and it would remain that way for as long as she and Owen walked this earth together. That was the greatest gift of all.